Hello, everyone, and welcome to Community Bookstore's virtual event series. My name is Hal Levinka, and I'm the event director at the bookstore, and I'm absolutely thrilled today to be collaborating again with our friends at NYRB to welcome Darryl Pinckney here to present the reissue of his book, Blackballed, The Black Vote and U.S. Democracy, in conversation with Zack Graham. While the pandemic has taken a toll across all of our lives, virtual programs like the one you're about to see have become bright spots in our days. And I want to give a huge thanks to Darryl and Zack for joining us this evening. So to a little bit of housekeeping before we get started. You should be able to see and hear our presenters, but they cannot see or hear you. So if you have any questions, please click on the Q&A button here at the bottom of your screen to submit them. We will try to get through as many of those as we can at the end of the program. There's also a chat button down here where I'll be posting a link to buy tonight's book from our store. So please click and buy, which is important. A caveat for tonight's event and for all virtual events, we are all at the mercy of our home internet connections and server loads, so please bear with any technical issues that could arise. We will try to solve them quickly. And finally, our event series is going to continue to the end of the fall and into the winter. So head over to our website to find out what's coming up. One program that I do want to point out, again, collaborating with our friends at NYRB on Thursday, December 3rd, we're celebrating the reissue of William Gaddis's classic novels, The Recognitions and JR, with a panel featuring Tom McCarthy, Lydia Millay, Joshua Cohen, and Dustin Illingworth. We are taking registrations for that event now, and I will post a link in the chat. So now a little about our presenters and we'll get started. Darryl Pinckney, a longtime contributor to the New York Review of Books, is the author of the novels High Cotton and Black Deutschland and several works of nonfiction, most recently the collection Busted in New York and Other Essays. He has collaborated with Robert Wilson on the director's productions of The Forest, Time Rocker, Orlando, The Old Woman, Letter to a Man, Grincha, A Street Opera, and Mary Said What She Said. And Zack Graham's writings have appeared in Rolling Stone, GQ, The Nation, The Believer, the Los Angeles Review of Books, and many other places. He was born in Chicago and lives in New York, where he is at work on a collection of short stories and a novel. So Darryl and Zack, the stage is yours.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. And thank you, Zack, for joining me in this conversation.
Thank you. I think, Darryl, we're going to start with a bit of a reading from the reissue of Blackballed. To begin, and then we'll jump into some questions, not only for myself, but also from the audience.
Okay. Well, Blackballed began as a lecture in what is called the Robert B. Silver's lecture series sponsored by the New York Review of Books. This was in 2012. It's a history of the Black vote, really, told partly as a family story, but also through witnesses and the autobiographies of civil rights figures. So it's an attempt to kind of build up the history since Reconstruction onto the eve of the 2012 campaign. And so this is some concluding reflections at the time. I have to put on reading glasses. So. We won't have another Black president anytime soon, people say. Black people are going to catch hell once Obama leaves office, some Black people say. It's not that our troubles have come back, they say. It's that these troubles never went away. One thing about pessimism is that it feels sane. Pessimists are those who can't be taken in, people who can't be fooled. I told you so. But it is also a habit of mind. It reconciles us to being powerless. It justifies detachment, indifference. It is even fear of having power, as was that old feeling among some Black people that by the time we got somewhere, that place was no good anymore. If we're here, then wherever we are must have declined from what it had been before us. Maybe that feeling hasn't entirely gone away, and maybe it will finally pass with the civil rights generation. These days, America is much less like the country we had in mind and getting more controlled, cordoned off, prohibited, restricted, under surveillance. The young know whom to blame. There are some white people who would rather see the country wrecked than have anything work under President Obama. It is a shock that racism in US political life is so virulent that the heirs of white supremacy, unwilling to face the prophecy in the demographics, would rather destroy it all than hand it over. It is this land theirs. It is theirs. Before World War I, America knew robber baron rapacity and dangerous inequality. But back then, the sense of the world's resources was that they'd never run out. This time, something different is out there. Thomas Piketty's sensation, Capital in the 21st Century, is a book I would have given to my father, interested as he was in the question of how so much of the world's wealth is becoming increasingly concentrated in very few hands. I think I'll get it for myself with its intimidating graphs, in case underlying everything going on in America is a sense that times of misery are ahead, at home and abroad, and that now that we realize resources are finite, things are beginning to fall apart. The rich are raising those feudal drawbridges again. How mean and primitive America looks and sounds up close at the moment. Meanwhile, millions of targeted dollars are pouring through our politics and into our heads. Citizens United versus Federal Election Commission may be the worst Supreme Court decision since Plessy versus Ferguson, but Black people are not brought up to believe in the cyclical view of history. Everywhere in the West, governments are undermined by or find it prudent to appease corporations that are supranational. The post-war institutions that were the means by which we belong to the world are failing. A great secular age of democratic experiment in which our federal government had now and then discovered its place is fading. The history of Black people in America is full of paradox, the latest of which is that Black people and their allies are now the defenders of the nation state, having been traditionally the victims and opponents of state power. So, it's 2012. And I feel very strongly there's a kind of pre-pandemic world.
Absolutely.
It belongs to,
Yeah.
what you could not foresee is very present.
Absolutely. You talk a lot in that section and in the essay Blackballed, which initially was obviously the speech about President Obama, about the legacy of President Obama, specifically regarding race, which has been a matter of some controversy. He's accused of not doing enough for Black people or not speaking enough about Black issues over the course of his presidency. Specifically, you mentioned the writing of Frederick Harris, a Columbia University professor, and criticizing him. And I wonder, how did you think about President Obama's legacy on race as you were writing Blackballed back in 2012, 2013, and published in 2014? And has your view of that legacy changed now in 2020?
Well, I see him as part of a change that had been going on for some time. And this had to do with the generation that had gone to school with Black kids in the class, schools that wanted to have Black kids in the class, the increase of Black people, increased visibility in the culture, and outside of roles that people had become accustomed to having Blacks in. And then he was also a part of, and certainly a beneficiary of enormous political changes that were a long time coming within the Democratic Party specifically, where the rules changed that made his advancement possible. And for this, he owes a lot to, say, Jesse Jackson, who was very much this kind of figure that came from civil rights. And so people thought, oh, he can't represent or appeal to a wide enough audience. But after 2 campaigns, he did. But also, Obama is part of or his success is part of that sort of new coalition that I still think has a chance of replacing the New Deal coalition, or succeeding or extending the New Deal coalition that elected Harold Washington mayor of Chicago the first time around. The second time around, a lot of whites voted against him, and so the black vote put him in. But shortly thereafter, a few years thereafter, Carolyn Moseley Brown was elected senator from Illinois with the support of this very coalition. That then had a kind of national expression in Obama's campaign. And I had thought it would hold to put Hillary Clinton in the White House, but it didn't, not really. The popular vote it did, but electorally, or the way it sort of played out, it didn't. And everyone who said at the time, oh, it's not that she's a woman, I just don't like Hillary, forget why people disliked her in the first place. A woman who made no secret about wanting to exercise power. And we still have some trouble with women like that. Just as you kind of had to sneak up on the voter if you're black, in a way, you have to sneak up on the voter if you're a woman. But I wonder if this is true anymore. I'm not sure.
I don't know if it's true insofar as the historic nature of Obama being even a presidential candidate, right? And then winning the nomination of the party and then going on, to become the president of the United States. That's been done, right? So what is now the historical precedent? Like, how can we move the needle forward again, right? Is something that sort of occurs to me. But let me backtrack a little bit and talk a little bit about the essay, Blackballed. Specifically, you were talking about the legacy of coalition building and the movement of trying to enhance and protect the black vote. And inherent in that movement is the Monumental Voting Rights Act of 1965. You spend a lot of time in the opening of the essay talking about the history of that piece of legislation, the players around that legislation, what that legislation proved to be historically. And then later on in the essay, you take on the Supreme Court verdict of Shelby County versus Holder in 2013, and how that verdict attempted to roll back a number of the protections afforded to black voters by the VRA. Can you talk a little bit about that part of the essay and how these two monumental historical events relate to one another?
I was very interested in the film Selma, but I was puzzled why Ava DuVernay made Lyndon Johnson the villain and not J. Edgar Hoover. Because the one thing Johnson did was the Voting Rights Act of 1965. He and King managed to sort of come together for this legislation. That was very important and made an immediate difference. The Voting Rights Act of 1965 not only sort of registered or made it possible for record numbers of black people to register to vote, it had this provision whereby 19 states in the historic Confederacy that had a history of blatant voter discrimination based on race had to have the approval of the courts, the Court of Appeal in, I think in Washington, for any changes in the way they as states conducted elections. So this gave federal oversight to state conduct of elections. And so it got rid of a lot of things like grandfather clauses and all these things that, had been obstacles to blacks voting in the South. So that in 1966, you had a record number of black officials elected, North and South, on the local, state, and city levels. I think Edward Brooke went into the Senate that year as well. No, maybe he was a year later. And he ran on Vietnam, not race.
Right.
But also with the Voter Registration Act came sort of various projects, like the Voter Education Board that was run by Vernon Jordan, that sort of went to communities and taught them how to be citizens. Because, people that never had voting in their families wouldn't necessarily know how to vote or might be intimidated still. And so these voter education projects were very important because they, got people over the dread of encountering a state that had always been violent in its response to their presence. And this meant a lot. The Voting Rights Act was reinstated periodically by the full Congress all the time. The last time, say in 2006, they never argued with the provisions of the bill. But in 2013, in this decision that you refer to, the Supreme Court I think the opinion was written by Justice Roberts, was saying, well, that was 50 years ago, and these 19 states don't need to be watched anymore. And so that particular provision of the Voting Rights Act, that these 19 states had to submit any change in their election procedure, plans, styles to federal courts for approval, was done away with. And the first thing several states like Kentucky and Alabama did was vote through very stringent voter ID laws. So, it had an immediate effect. And another thing to keep in mind is the arguments Justice Robert used were the same ones he'd written as a clerk for Bork, and the same arguments that had been used against the Voting Rights Act when it was passed in 1965, when a number of organizations expressed their intent not to conform or follow what is going on. So in a way, what Trump is doing, this kind of politician has always done. He's just never been in the White House. I'm not going to do what federal law says I should do. I'm not going to do it. And so here he is.
And this, landmark decision then paved the way for the undoing of a tremendous amount of the protection that these states were afforded. I mean, if you think about it from the perspective of it was voted in every 4 or 6 years, you have an America now under Trump where you see, if not more blatant voter discrimination, intimidation, and overall racism on behalf of the local officials, the local politicians, the voters themselves in these 19 states than you did perhaps in the 70s, the 80s, the 90s. Do you think it was a deliberate decision by Roberts to try to empower the GOP to try to discriminate against Black voters, or do you see his decision as one purely legal in basis?
Well, it can't be purely legal in basis. There's no such thing. It's all an interpretation of constitutional law and federal responsibility and states' rights and all these kind of arguments. So, but purely legal, a legal argument is attached to certain social aims. Or even if you claim not to have one, that is also a social aim because you're saying the federal government should not interfere in this state matter.
Right.
But actually, since Reconstruction, we've been saying the federal government is the oversight of these states that have always had this problem with this population. So, I mean, the coalitions, they're not sort of New Deal, they're more like Bayard Rustin or Ella Baker. They're imagining these progressive coalitions of sort of unions, women, minorities, sort of liberals, people like that. I would say that the code that the Republican Party has used since Nixon in 1969 simply fell away, and everyone was rather open about what these things stood for, what these things meant to the Republican Party, Republican candidates, and Trump. The interesting thing is that it didn't work in the sense of intimidation. And I think that so many people were alarmed by what could happen at the and voting in the time of the pandemic, that it made them sort of show up to vote and avoid a lot of the things that were threatened and show up early to vote.
Yeah.
I stood in line 2.5 hours, but some people I heard stood in line 5 hours. And then on the day of the election itself, there was no lines at all, but
Yeah.
only here in New York. I'm impressed that even though Trump has been on the phone and really sort of leaning on people,
Yeah.
that the election officials from state to state have more or less stood their ground. So it's not the electoral process that I think buckled on November 3rd. It's everything since, and it's the Republican Party. And also, though, this astonishing vote for this candidate after all that has happened and everything he said. So I sort of feel personally bewildered.
You feel bewildered about how many people voted for Trump?
I do, yes.
Interesting. Well, I want to get to the election. But I kind of want to ask a very specific question about coronavirus and the pandemic. So in Blackballed, you write about the various tactics used to suppress Black voters.
Right.
Not putting enough polling places in majority Black districts, changing the location of the polling places last minute without notifying the voters, randomly purging Black voters from the voter rolls, the voter ID, the list goes on. A lot of those suppressive tactics were centered around in-person polling and in-person voting, right? So my question is, do you think that the considerable shift away from in-person day of voting and toward early and mail-in voting, which was basically attached to the pandemic, do you think that that made age-old tactics of voter suppression less effective in 2020?
Yes, because it was sort of a much more difficult environment to mess with.
Yeah.
It was very organized. I think people had anticipated all sorts of trouble, and in the end, they didn't have the stomach to create the trouble that they'd been threatening to. And so, but I think, yes, I think that certainly the early voting and the mail-in voting, all of that made it much harder, and created a bloc vote where perhaps there hadn't been one before. In the same way that we kept hearing warnings about the same-day voting in the red counties.
Right, exactly.
All that turned out to be true. I remember in 2016 being so hurt and disappointed, I swore I wouldn't pay attention to polls again. And I really think that one of the things that's happened since in the last few weeks is I once again don't think the polls are, it's the business that really has nothing to do with what is really going on. It's sort of saying 77% of the people who voted for Trump believe the election was rigged. Well, how do they know it's 70% of 70 million? How do they know from whatever sample they have? Because I don't think people speak honestly to pollsters anymore. Everybody's his own media empire, and I don't know how we get a sense of what the nation thinks anymore.
I tend to agree with you. I tend to agree with you about polling and political organization with regard to how the elites and how the powers that be and how the institutions, their connections with the voters and their connections with the citizens seem to be tenuous at best and decreasing by the day. But one follow-up question to my initial question. Do you think this shift from mail-in and early voting to, or from in-person voting to mail, do you think that's a permanent shift? Do you think that in 2022 and 2024, as the world begins to refunction again with the existence of coronavirus, that we will see the same stats that we saw in terms of turnout and in terms of the sheer ratio of voters that were voting early and voting by mail?
Well, I'm sure there are people who want that to be the case, but I'm sure there are many people who don't want that to be the case.
That is also true.
And considering the state houses in which parties' hands, and who gets to draw borders and districts. That's sort of a question up in the air, but I'm sure people want to, and it makes more sense. But early voting has always favored working people, and so you get a lot of people who are not for that.
Yeah.
An old tactic used to be, you don't get the day off to vote, and perhaps people should.
I mean, in Australia, election day is a national holiday. Polls are open early, they close late.
Voting is mandatory in Greece, even if you only spoil your ballot.
Yeah, compulsory voting, or else you get fined. I think it is.
I don't know how I feel about that, but
well, at the very least, you should be able to abstain. So I want to talk specifically about the election, what happened, because you're seeing a lot of different narratives, right? You're seeing a lot of people take credit for a lot of what happened. You're seeing a lot of people float a lot of theories. A lot of these people are the same people who completely predicted the thing wrong. And obviously the story that is connected to Blackballed and what people are talking about is the Black vote, the increase in Black voter turnout, the unprecedented, specifically increase in voter turnout and support of the Democratic Party in major cities and swing states, Detroit, Philadelphia, obviously Atlanta. Do you think, put simply, that the Black vote in those urban areas was the difference in this election?
yes. And according to Lawrence Bobo, a sociologist at Harvard, they held the balance in the last election in the sense that they stayed home. He contends that had the Black vote in 2016 been what it had been in 2012 in Milwaukee, Detroit, and Philadelphia, Hillary Clinton would have won. Biden won the cities, and so he won in the Electoral College. So yes, I think the Black vote has made a difference. At the same time, the solid South, maybe it's not so solid anymore, considering Georgia, Virginia, and the showing in North Carolina, and the interest in South Carolina. Too bad that horrible gas bank didn't lose, but never mind. Well, not never mind. It is a pity. And then Biden did very well in the West. So all of that means what that means. At the same time, I was struck by a story in the New York Times a couple of days ago about the affirmative action initiative in California being roundly defeated in populations, in districts that have large Asian or Latino populations.
I did see that.
Or that the Latino vote was so high for Trump, who has been threatening to throw them out, and in the Rio Grande area where the virus has been very severe, the Trump vote was very high. And I don't want to say it's, nobody wants to be with the party of Black people, but I think that it's another America, this kind of global America that we don't really know or haven't taken in yet. That we keep saying we're an immigrant country and things like that, but when we say it, we mean the old thing of the immigrant came and became and turned into an American, this idea of what an American was. And then we said, oh, but that's just sort of saying everyone should be a white person. And so Americans should be this, this, and that, or all these other things. But we do have these sort of immigrant groups that don't identify with the historical freedom struggles or anything like that. They don't come from places like that. They don't feel any responsibility or accountability for this history. So why should they pay for these programs as if they had to? But more to the point, why should their children suffer because of these programs? Well, the interesting thing is, why do you assume your children would suffer under affirmative action? Because they're all saying we can do it on merit, but those people sort of couldn't. So we don't want to identify with affirmative action programs, et cetera, because we don't need them. And this is this kind of, you know, it is sort of saying, that's fine, we can be white on our own, we don't need this, or something. I can't find quite the words yet.
Yeah.
You know, we're living in a much more internationalized America than we realize, that isn't taking on an American identity, you know, not beyond that of, we want this life with these expectations and without these problems, but sort of nothing more, you know? And they don't come from places where the state is anything except something to avoid. And we're a bit like that now ourselves. Where people, you know, you either want to avoid the state or you don't believe the state should sort of be bothering you at all until, but you know, we live in a time now where the only help we can have comes from a strong central state. And I don't mean China and Wuhan lockdown. I mean, you know, coordinated planning from the center of how to cope with the virus and also save the economy. It requires what people say they are not for, which is social engineering by the federal government.
Well, real leadership, you know, I mean, I think, and I want to ask a question specifically about, you see in the voting in California, when you have this affirmative action thing voted down by a lot of immigrant communities, you have the classic Hispanic versus Latino differentiation, you know, first generation, sort of like capitalist, aspiring immigrant communities who come to America because they want to vote Republican. They want a free market. They don't want the government interfering in their business. You see a lot of that. You see a lot of that crystallizing, especially in Florida. That was particularly concerning. How do you see the Democratic Party or a party of the left recapturing that?
You have to sort of say the idea that the right or the free market has no government interference is just not true at all.
Yeah.
The largest beneficiaries of government support in the United States are corporations.
That's correct.
In the form of tax breaks alone. So this is a kind of fiction that corporations and the right have been sort of selling, that somehow the left or liberalism is state heavy and your taxes are paying for something for someone else and not for you. This is a sort of, not to mention a bad idea of society. It's also not true in the sort of larger scheme. Also, I think that the Black vote, because we assume it's a bloc vote, we look at other minorities or aspiring communities in the same way. And the Latino vote is certainly not a bloc vote. Florida is full of Cubans, Venezuelans, Nicaraguans, you know, who are, you know, have left certain situations, and so they don't want to hear anything. And I'm told that, of course, the Republican Party invested a lot in sort of advertising in the Hispanic communities, having to do with, you know, Biden and taxes and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
But at the same time, the Mexican vote in Texas was not as large for the Democrats as one would think. I think it was 38% for Trump. That's a lot, considering that most of the Latino
40% of Mexicans in Texas voted for Trump. That is incredible.
So,
wow.
You know, it sort of says that something else is going on. I think that also we keep thinking of women as a bloc, but not taking in how many women continue to vote Republican. But it is worth saying that Black women outvote every group in the country on polling day. And it's important to remember that the Klan revived in the 1920s because Black women had the vote. This is what sort of brought the Klan back out, was these women, Black women.
And I want you to go on. This was my next question. You know, I would like to drill down specifically on the importance of Black women as voters, not only in 2020, but historically. Can you give us a little bit of context around how important Black women were in this election, not only to the presidential ticket, but down ballot for the whole Democratic Party? And then, and how have we seen that historically? You say the Klan revived because Black women had the vote. Black women getting the vote brought the Klan back out, and sort of how have you seen that? How's the history sort of gone here? Like, how are we?
It took a long time.
Like, what are we looking at?
I mean, Black women were the rank and file of civil rights organizations. They did a lot of the organizational work that made these places that exist. At the same time, they took a lot of the risk, but they weren't in leadership positions. It was Bayard Rustin, who, as a gay guy, you would have thought would have known better, who was against Dorothy Height speaking at the March on Washington in 1963. A lot of the men just said, well, it's not necessary. It's understood that women are part of this. And this was, I think, the thinking for a long time. And I can remember a book from 1979 by Michelle Walls called Black Macho and the Myth of the Superwomen that really attacked the civil rights movement and this kind of male dominance. And a lot of Black women at the time resisted the book, thought this isn't helping, it's, unity is what we need above all things.
We need to unify versus.
And I think we're really past that point where, for one thing, we assume Black men have had it harder under white supremacy than Black women. I don't think we think that's true anymore. It's just, oppression has gender specific sort of things sometimes, like, and I don't, but at the same time, talking to young Black men or listening to Black men talk about the increase of the Black male vote for Trump, I do wonder how it is that liberalism has become not synonymous, but suggests the feminization of America. So that a lot of people say they like Trump because he talks tough or he's this tough guy. And you think, no, he's not. He's a sort of whiny, tantrumy baby. Why is this image, why are they sort of putting this image of a tough guy on this guy? Yeah. Why do people need a tough guy again? And I think it's because people sort of feel that liberalism is a kind of nanny culture or a scolding culture. And that is a misfortune because it should be seen as a door opening culture, that everyone can sort of step through.
Yeah.
Maybe that's the problem.
I do want to ask a little question about what you just mentioned. There was an increase in Black male support of Donald Trump from 2016 and 2020. Barack Obama, in a recent book tour interview, mentioned something about rapper endorsements. That comment to me was a little errant. Do you assign any particular phenomenon to the increase in Black male support of Donald Trump over the two election cycles? And does it play into something more, like largely about Black republicanism? You write about Black republicanism in Blackballed, Condoleezza Rice's family, old Black Republicans from Birmingham, Alabama. Is that part of that tradition, or what do you?
No, because hers would be this Reconstruction family habit, like Lena Horne's family.
Sure.
That was sort of Republican patronage, but this was the Republican Party of Charles Sumner and Frederick Douglass. That finally ran out.
The side.
The Democrats, that was Woodrow Wilson and all this kind of Southern violence and sort of bigotry. No, I'm afraid that it's a kind of iconoclastic thing among sort of Blacks. Baldwin once said, a Black guy is never supposed to spoil the hustle of another Black guy in a white room. So, you have met sort of Republican Black people who are ambitious of one kind or another, either socially or business-wise. But you get a lot of Black people who sort of see a kind of iconoclasm in it. that goes by various sort of slogans. I don't want my vote taken for granted. I don't want someone to tell me how to vote just because of who I am. All these sorts of sort of individualistic stances that would always seem to me counter to their interest as individuals.
Absolutely.
But people see it as a kind of dissent, and all of this, I think, is in some ways showing the constant demonization of liberalism, the left, and progressive traditions in the United States. The liberalism has never been a majority. It's never been in control. Obama's presidency is marked by what he was able to achieve in spite of terrific sort of obstacles and insulting opposition, all this sort of things. But, no, liberalism is this kind of demon. And what the right really minds is the prestige of liberal ideas, that the America's soul is liberal, as defined by all the things we thought were American. You have others saying, no, our soul is conservative because military, this or that, or this and that. But that's not really in the founding doctrines, even if you say, well, it was written by slave guys. The doctrines always have this inclusive interpretation as last possibility. And this is what sort of people really mind, because it asks things of us that we're not in the mood to give in a time of uncertainty, shortage, exhaustion, and all these sort of things like that.
Can I ask one question? Just because you mentioned this earlier about the sort of disaffectedness of people lying to pollsters, and I don't know if you've heard this recently or ever, but I have. When you hear a Black person say, I don't vote because my vote won't change things. When you reading Blackballed, I thought, the centuries, decades long struggle for the Black right to vote, and the people who died and were wounded, shot, killed, the amount of paperwork that went into organizations, money, time. I mean, it's mind boggling. When you hear, if you hear that, people of color saying, I don't vote because my vote won't change anything, or I won't vote because no matter who's in power, my life's not going to change. How do you think and feel about that kind of reaction?
Well, I think, of course, it's not true. It's never true. There's no such thing as not voting, because if you don't vote, then you vote for the other side. It's a historical case in America.
Absolutely.
And then, so I think sometimes it disguises a lot of fear.
Yeah.
Of trying, getting involved. It disguises a lot of not knowing what to do or how to do it. And it's also an easy and a lazy way out. And we're all very lazy when it comes to our democracy, even if we sign petitions, make donations, and show up at demonstrations. I don't know what else we can do. The moment hasn't yet told us what is needed. I certainly think that this summer, the response that ignited by the death of George Floyd made the difference in the election in November.
Okay.
From the number of young people who were registered to the number of young people who came out. And if I have any overriding feeling from the election, it's that I don't understand the country anymore, and it's suddenly become a young person's subject. So you have to tell me what's going on, because I can't keep repeating what I know and believe in. And these are things I know in my heart and believe very deeply, but I have to sort of let someone else say it who will be heard, or is speaking to the people who need to act. And I'm not sure that well-intentioned commentators somehow allied with the professional political class, source of a voice that will be heard or trusted. Someone who's coming who will tell us something, but he or she here yet.
Yeah, I mean, so I do want to ask about that. In terms of voter turnout, you believe that the Black Lives Matter moment of the summer in the wakes of the murders of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor made the difference in the election. Do you think that's overall turnout? Do you think that's Black community specific turnout? Do you think that's young turnout? What?
I think it's Black and young.
Black and young.
And women.
And women as well.
Women, yeah. Okay. The women's vote, the women's march was a real psychological saving moment after Trump's election. It was the first thing that happened that said, we're still here. And a moment of kind of reorganization. So I think that's, an important part of things, the women's contribution as, as women.
Excellent. So I have one final question, and then I'm going to take some audience questions. So looking forward, in Blackballed, you write that the National Black Political Convention's agenda, which was held in Gary, Indiana in 1972, said that, quote, both parties betray Black people whenever their interests conflict with those of Black people. That's a direct quote. Joe Biden and Kamala Harris have given a lot of lip service to Black Lives Matter, the importance of criminal justice reform, the importance of policing reform, and other racial equality related areas of growth, improvement, etc. Do you think the next 4 years will reveal that they were serious about these intentions, that there will be some serious movement and progress with regard to all these areas? Or do you think it was lip service to get the Black vote?
Well, no, I think of course they're serious. Kamala Harris, her background as a district attorney makes her kind of especially when it comes to ending the war on drugs, which is crucial. A lot of policing and the kind of social intervention that police are called upon to do that they shouldn't stems from the miseducation that has come from the war on drugs. So that should end, and prison reform should begin there. And that's something they can do. Another thing is that, of course, we don't just need a stimulus package or a stimulus bailout. We need a kind of domestic New Deal, a domestic Marshall Plan. Our infrastructure is very old anyway. And so, we need a kind of public works program that would include white collar jobs, since data surveillance and lab work are the kind of white collar proletarian work of the future. We need these kind of training programs. And I think that also you'll find the one thing the Biden administration does that may be very new is its attention to Africa, investment in Africa. And the plans Biden is said to have regarding investment, new relations, and a higher level of attention to Africa itself.
The African continent. Yeah, I mean, there's a tremendous amount of room to grow there, not only in terms of our diplomatic relations, but in terms of investing and strengthening global partnerships from an economic perspective. And I thank you.
China's already there. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. All right, so I'm going to take some questions from the viewers at home, if you will. And we haven't talked a lot about the state of the GOP tonight. We talked about Trump a little bit, and we touched on it in the VRA, but this is a good question. To what extent do you view the current state of the GOP, specifically the Trump-led Republican Party, as an anomaly versus the outcome of a steady devolution dating back to, say, Nixon? And how has racism, whether veiled or overt, figured in our current state of affairs?
Well, I would say that what was just a tool for Nixon, the Southern strategy, um, uh, hasn't sort of worked anymore, but it's morphed into something else, which is, this kind of disaffection or this party of mm, I'll start again. I can't tell if the Republican Party was hijacked by the Tea Party permanently,
Yeah.
or if it's sort of some current pulsing through that will be discharged. I don't think that the Republicans are a solid bloc either. I think there are these kind of suburban people and more rural people or blue collar people. And, no one ever talks about the rich who vote
Yeah.
for Trump in droves, because it just means more money.
Taxes, right? Yeah, exactly.
Has nothing to do with racism. They could care less. It's just money. I think a
They're
lot
one
of
issue
people
voters.
associate the Republican Party with, making money, not free enterprise, but
Mm.
making money. Um, um, I'm not sure, but I think that the problem with Trump is that, of course, he demeans everything he touches instantly, and so no, it's really the weirdest thing. He has this touch of that withers everything. It just withers away. It's like a poison touch. Uh, and I don't know if this has happened to the party or not. I mean, they certainly are exerting incredible control for a lame duck president. And I don't know if this has to do with his fantasies or his son and his sons and daughter and son-in-law, or with what has happened to the party itself and the people in it. But the corruption,
Yeah.
and the willingness to kind of do or say anything to stay in power, I think is really dangerous. I mean, we're assuming that everything will be all right December 14th, January 20th, that will sort of creep to the common sense end. But he sort of based his whole thing on trying something just to see if he can get away with it. And everyone has let him, because their power falls right behind his indifference to anything having to do with his high office that limits his sense of entitlement or power.
Makes
So
sense.
I think it's very dangerous. Whatever happens after this, the Republican Party, I think, will be in very bad shape.
Well, I suppose
it's a real fork in the road.
A real fork in the road. I was about to say that's a good and bad thing, right?
Yeah. They're going to have to decide.
I'm going to combine a couple questions here. I'm sort of seeing a trend, and I'm going to sort of reformulate them in my own words. You see a lot of, some bolstered minority turnout for Trump. You see a lot of discontinuity between the quote unquote liberal frame of racism, calling Trump a blanket racist, saying the GOP is a blanket racist party, and the actual results of the votes. Do you think, and let me try to find the exact wording of this one. Do you think there's a chasm between how the activist left frames racism and how real world voters define it? Do you think that there's a disconnect at this point?
Yes. I mean, the left sounds rather academic to most people because they are going into our historical causes and social consequences and everything we think one needs to know to understand these problems. But it sounds academic to people who don't sort of feel the same urgency or interest. I remember when the wall fell in Berlin, and the attacks on the Jewish graveyards in East Berlin, and someone writing on Brecht's grave, Jewish cow, though of course he wasn't Jewish. It was everything you hadn't been able to say or feel out loud under this sort of hyper-correct Soviet state line about minorities and stuff like that, though it wasn't true. Suddenly everyone could sort of say. And a bit of the same has happened here, that, you know, you can be really rude about stuff that all this time you've been told is, you know, not nice to be sort of rude about. So people feel a certain kind of daring and disobedience or something, all that. And that's, I think, a reaction to this kind of hectoring that they may feel from the left about, you know, correct or woke, things like that.
Indeed. And I'll ask one final question here. So the moment you realized that you didn't really understand America anymore, what was your emotion in that moment or that process? Were you frightened? Were you liberated? Were you confused? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, I was, I really am annoyed that all this is happening and I'm the age I am, you know. I'm sure young people feel very differently about all of this. But no, I sort of feel on the off ramp. You know, I don't really understand. But a lot of what I treasure, I'm not willing to give up to fit in or be part of. So, you know, I've been a sort of fellow traveler or outsider or, for one reason or another, not fitting in all my life. And so this is just a continuation of it, but it's a surprise.
Well, can I say, Darryl, that in reading your work in the past couple of weeks, I'd say that you are more connected than ever, and I'm learning, and we're all learning from you. Your thoughts, your feelings, your writing. Busted in New York is an amazing essay collection. I'm learning a tremendous amount about the history of this country and of the Black community and arts and letters, and continue to do what you're doing because we're all better for it. So thank you very, very much.
No, you're very kind, and I can't tell you what words like that mean, especially now. It's very generous of you to offer them. So thank you. And
well, let me also express a huge thanks, Darryl, for joining us tonight. Zach, for the amazing questions. Before we leave, I'm going to post a link to the book one more time in the chat. Everyone, please click on it and buy it. It will be great. Otherwise, huge thanks again,
Darryl. The bookstore. Always a pleasure.
We love having you. We will do this again sometime in the spring, hopefully in person. So again, a huge thanks, Darryl. Huge thanks, Zach, for staying up.
Stay safe and be well.
Absolutely, everybody be safe, and have a great evening.
And God
Thank you very much. Bye, Darryl.
Bye.